I essentially couldn't help but notice that the sports nutrition products that I was used to seeing just plastered across the sidelines, across the post-game press conferences, across every inch of professional sports, were not in there. They were not in there, and they were not being used. And instead, in every player's locker or even in their hands, right? Because we were genuinely in a post-game environment, was products that I had never seen before, from brands I'd never heard of, that oftentimes looked more similar to prescription medicines than they did consumer products.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside. Woo!
Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Trampoline Park himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how's it going, man? You jumping into this interview?
Yes, I'm going to do a front flip in this interview because I learned how to do that.
You learned how to do a front flip? First time?
I think I had done it at a trampoline park in the past, but I definitely got a lot more reps on the front flip front this past week.
The front flip front. What a magical, wondrous place. Can you do a backflip?
Never tried. That one scares me.
See, the number one rule about backflipping is don't be afraid.
Yeah, right. I think that's kind of the number one rule of anything that's physically challenging. You kind of just have to go for it whole hog, you know?
I think that's also the number one rule of anything that's mentally challenging.
That's true. And I would say things like front flips and back flips are actually more mentally challenging than physically challenging. Unless, you don't have the physical tools to do so.
Wait, you said that they are more physically challenging than mentally challenging?
No, mentally challenging than physically challenging, given you have a certain baseline athletic ability. If I was 250 pounds, I don't think my mindset matters all that much. I'm not going to do a front flip.
Why not?
I just don't think the physics work out. I didn't go to physics school.
That's true. You didn't go to physics school.
I can tell you, though, what I did learn in this whole front flip, dodgeball, frisbee, slam dunking, trampoline park experience is that you got to stretch.
You got to stretch, and you gotta have some sort of good. Well, we're getting old, Jay. That's the real problem.
Before and after, because recovery time was also bad.
And have you seen these leg wrap things for recovery time now?
No, is that just like an ace bandage around your leg that's branded well?
No, it's like a very large thermal sleeve almost that compresses. And I don't know if it's hot or cold because I never tried one, but they seem to be all the rage amongst my friends who actually work out hard.
Sounds like an ace bandage that's branded well. I had a sleeve like that when I was in high school for my leg that I thought was bruised, turned out to be broken, and it did help.
Interesting. Yeah, so I think recovery is 1/10 the battle, and maybe more. I don't know how the breakdown goes. Actually, I'm not gonna guess here, but you got to stretch on the up front. You got to recover on the back end. You can do that a couple ways. You got to stretch on the back end. You got to use some very expensive ace bandages, and maybe you can even use some supplements.
Speaking of supplements, today we're speaking with Matt Wan, the founder and CEO of Momentous. Momentous is a nutritional supplement company driven by science, consumed by transparency, and grounded in experience. Their products are designed by the NFL, NBA, and NHL human performance experts, and they have leveraged the best knowledge in sports in order to deliver innovative products that use only high-quality ingredients, absolutely no fillers, are certified safe, and taste phenomenal. Big claims.
How often do you drop names in conversations? Are you a name dropper? I know you pretty well, but I don't know if you're a name dropper in casual conversation.
I'm not a name dropper. I think that name dropping is a red flag in a lot of circumstances.
Is there a name dropping equivalent when you drop a company name or an organization name? Or are those different? I know Arnold Schwarzenegger is different than, I know the organizers of the Arnold, or no?
I think it's relatively the same because anytime you're just dropping something that has name recognition and you're trying to sort of leech off or siphon off some of the brand equity in that name to yourself, I don't love that.
So how do you feel about the fact that there are so many league names in this kind of introduction?
I think that because this is not like I know this person or, I've spoken with this. If this is saying our experts have experience in performance from their experience in these leagues and they are on the team, I think that's different.
So it's like a little bit of a nuance there, but there's sometimes that you can use heuristics for the good and sometimes you use heuristics and they're red flags.
This is more like a bona fide of your team than just like pure proximity social proof.
Wow. This is like a fascinating psychological argument that I think we could dive way deeper into, but I'm sure if I was a listener, I'd be bored already. So let's move on to some facts.
Some facts. Momentous was founded in 2016, was in stealth mode until late 2017. Matt co-founded the company with Rob Deerdick.
That's a familiar name.
That's a familiar name. Got me off my roll. Speaking of roll, he's a skateboarder, and he's also of ridiculousness fame. First product line went live in 2018. They're a remote team based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Did I mention Jackson Hole, Wyoming yet? Remote team based in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, with members in Palo Alto, Boston, and Texas. Palo Alto, but we're going to allow it.
We're going to allow it because they fit into our theme of remote work culture, remote work, and distributed teams. So, you know what? They have a couple people in Palo Alto. It's going to happen eventually on this podcast, but they aren't headquartered there, and they have people all over the country.
Round peg in a square Jackson Hole.
Oh, man, that was terrible. That was so bad.
I think it's pretty good. Eric, do you use supplements in your recovery after your workouts? You work out more than I do.
I do work out more than you do, although not right now because, embarrassingly, I was lifting a mini table and strained my pec, which is like the most embarrassing thing I think I've ever said publicly on this podcast. But yeah, I don't really use too much post-workout anymore because my workouts aren't that crazy. I still do use pre-workout, but not the crazier stuff that I used to use when I was younger.
All right, well, we're about to dive into this interview with Matt. As we go through this interview, guys, if you have thoughts on it, please tweet at us at UpsideFM or email us hello@upside.fm. I'm sure there are a lot of folks out there who are much more knowledgeable on the supplement side than we are. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and your experiences and what this interview means to you. So reach out to us and we'll get into that interview right after this.
But before we do that, let's bring in Philip Bautista, an attorney at Taft, Stettinius & Hollister, to teach us about trademark law. Taft is a full-service law firm known for assisting entrepreneurs across the heartland. As a reminder, the following remarks by Taft attorneys are for informational purposes only and are not legal advice. This information is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No person or organization should act upon this information without first seeking professional counsel. Philip, we are through the disclaimer. Thanks for coming on. How are things in Cleveland, the new home of Odell Beckham?
Very excited about the Browns for once.
As a native Clevelander, I'm also excited about the Browns.
Philip, something that comes up a lot with founders here on the show is the idea of filing a trademark. And so we wanted to ask you, can two trademarks coexist? And what other misconceptions are there of filing a trademark?
There is a misconception out there that a trademark owner can prevent another party from using the same or similar trademark under all circumstances. And while this may be the case for owners of famous marks, think of Nike or Gucci, that is not the case for most marks. Similar trademarks may coexist if the owners are using them for different goods or different services, or have sufficiently different customers, or use different trade channels. So whether similar trademarks can coexist involves the weighing of a number of different facts, but by and large, there are many instances where similar trademarks can coexist.
Awesome. Very helpful. If people want to learn more about Taft or yourself, where should they go?
www.taftlaw.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn.
Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on.
We like to start on Upside with a background of the founder. Can you tell us about the history of Matt?
The history of Matt, if you will, is frankly almost entirely connected to the history of Momentous. I think like any consumer product company should be. It's really highly personal experience driven. This is actually a business I started working on at the end of my senior year of high school. So I had no formal business experience before starting this venture. All of my, quote, experience in the space was through direct experience in sports, through exposure to training, fitness, nutrition, nutritional products, etc. And then through many, many years of what some people would say are very, very boring dinner table conversations. But I certainly didn't find boring with my dad, who's been a VC for since the mid 80s. I guess it's the only thing he's ever done with his career. So I just sort of grew up around the entrepreneurship space. This isn't the way I would describe it to most people, but you guys would probably be sympathetic towards it in that I literally physically grew up on Sand Hill Road. Like that was literally where our childhood home was.
That's wild. What was the first sport you ever played?
I have no idea. I did every sport growing up. Maybe soccer, something like that. That might have been the first organized sport, soccer, basketball. My parents were both swimmers, so I got into swimming pretty early as well.
What's the first sport or fitness activity that you fell in love with?
That I really fell in love with, I'd have to say running. I was playing all sorts of sports through elementary school and even through high school as well. But I definitely noticed that when we had to do sprints for soccer or basketball, or when, you had to run 2 miles for warm-ups or whatever at practice, I love that part.
Man, that is so different than my experience playing sports.
I know. I love that part. I don't know why, but I even in middle school, although I was playing football in the fall, I would still go and race the cross country races. So I had this like interesting pecking order where it was like if like football practice would take precedent over cross country practice, but a cross country meet would be more important than practice. And if I had a football game, then I had to miss the meet.
How big was your high school?
Yeah, that's actually probably a more interesting question than you think. The first high school I went to, which was in Menlo Park here in California, was probably like 600 or something like that. So I don't know, maybe that's a medium-sized high school.
And a graduating class or the entire school?
The whole school. Yeah, like between 140 and 150 a grade, I'd say. The second high school I went to was 100 kids total. And I think there were 26 in my graduating class. And that was because after my sophomore year of high school, my family and I moved to Jackson Hole, Wyoming.
Why?
That's a very, very fair question. It's a place that we've been visiting for a long time. We're really, really passionate about the outdoors, about being outside. We started spending more and more of our summers there throughout my childhood. And I think what essentially happened was that my parents, my mom in particular, were already planning to move there after I went to college and just got impatient. My dad would actually probably push back a little bit on that statement by putting it more on my mom, in that we had been there for the summer, right? We'd been there through all of August. Then it was time to go back to school, time to go back to work. So my dad and I both came back to California. I had already started, training with the team again. My dad was back in the office. My mom, about 2 days before I was supposed to start my junior year in California, calls us and says, "Okay, guys, here's the deal. So I've toured the school out here. If you want to try it for a year, they'll let you in."
They had nothing but room with 26 kids per grade.
I guess they wanted the tuition dollars or something like that. But they basically, my mom had gone and sort of put the plan together already, was just really not looking to go home that year. And I agreed to try a semester at first. I was like, well, obviously I love Jackson. Okay, a semester's not a big deal. 4 or 5 months, whatever, right? I'll just go try that. I'll have that experience. No big deal. By the time I'd committed to that, then my school in California said, well, actually, if you're going to go do this, we'd rather you do a full year. I wasn't as excited about that, but frankly, I already sort of felt committed. But honestly, by the time I was a couple months in, I didn't want to go back.
Why not?
It's the best place in the world, man. It's just such a different it's just such a different lifestyle. For cross country practice, every week we'd get to go run in the national park. For winter sports, you'd get off school an hour and a half early to go ski every day. I studied hard, but I wanted to be outside as many minutes of the day as I could.
What are the athletic programs like in Jackson High School where you have 100 kids total?
Interestingly, because that school was so small, we actually shared teams with the public high school, which was, again, sort of closer to 600 or 700 kids total. So the teams were reasonable. Interestingly enough, though, because Wyoming's so small, you don't have more than one team in a town ever, right? So like when we had a track meet in California to race against our rival school, we literally walked to the meet. It was on the same street, right? We just walked to the other track. In Jackson, in Wyoming, the closest town for us, and I guess what was probably our rival school, was about 3 hours bus ride. I'd say the average ride for us on a weekend, and literally every weekend, was like 6 hours.
Wow.
It was such a culture shock for me. You can imagine like waking up on a bus, right, and looking out the field. I've got, 40 kids on this bus who like 3 weeks ago I had never even seen before. And it's just all, these high desert fields out the window as long as you can see. It was a definitely a new experience for me.
What about your friends in California when you said, I'm going to go to Jackson for a year? Like, what did they say?
Why? Why? Not unreasonably. But their expectation was that I was going to be back.
Are there any direct flights from the Menlo Park area to Jackson Hole?
You can do SFO to Jackson direct, like during the holidays and during the peak tourist seasons in the summer. But for the most part, no. You have to go through Denver or Salt Lake.
So your dad's a VC on Sand Hill Road, and your mom says, hey, we could actually just stay here in Jackson for half a year or a year. What did he do? Did he get out of the game, or was he traveling or working remote?
I mean, he can kind of work from anywhere. They've got an office, I guess, in Palo Alto and in Boston right now, but he can kind of work from anywhere. So the way we talk about it, in a pretty funny saying for, quote, Wyoming residents, right, is that Wyoming income tax is travel expense, meaning that he just sort of had to fly more as a result of that. You can take calls from anywhere, right? But to be at board meetings, et cetera, and get to meet companies, then you just got to get on a plane sometimes. And it was a lot less often that a company would be in the same area already, right?
My dad seems like he was like your dad in that the dinner table conversations revolved heavily around business, or at least that's what you hinted at. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what that was like growing up when VC maybe wasn't the biggest thing and what those kind of conversations were like?
It was partly me just listening in, frankly, in that he would take us to all our sports games still, right, on the weekends, and still wanted to drive us to school, still wanted to pick us up whenever possible. But when he was home, he would so often have like phone calls that he had to take in the car as a result of that. So I ended up like literally listening in on what must have been 1,000 different interactions, not only with entrepreneurs, but even board calls. So much so to the point that, from my car seat, I could actually like pick out other board members' voices. You know what I mean? Like, oh, that's Fred. Oh, that's Aton. Like I knew their voices, even though I hadn't met them.
Are there any conversations or snippets of conversations from that stuck out to you or that you held on to?
When there were decisions being made around companies, those were always the most interesting. By companies, I mean investment decisions. Those were always the most interesting ones for me when they were going back and forth on, trying to justify a valuation or put a term sheet together. And those were generally, more like, Monday morning calls for them. And those were really interesting for me. The ones that really stuck out, and maybe this isn't what you want me to talk about, but there were maybe 3 or 4 instances where I specifically remember, even though I was at a very young age, that there had been an instance of, some sort of sexual harassment or misconduct at one of the companies. And I remember those conversations because it's like the only time I feel like I've seen my dad pissed off. You know what I mean? Just like really, really angry. Sort of, you could hear it in his voice, sort of thing. Not trying to be gentle so much anymore. And this was before, I'd say, this culture in the workplace was much more publicly aware, but it was clearly still came up as a problem every now and then, and clearly something these companies took very seriously, at least in those few instances, right? Where, without going into detail, the three instances I think of were like, I immediately think of an example where, like, the woman made some comment to HR, right? HR reported it, board or somebody there looked at it, spoke to the guy. He said, yeah, oh, it's nothing. And then it was supposed to be nothing. And then it got to the board level and they're like, no. It's never nothing, right? And they go back and it's just this complete tip of the iceberg dynamic where it starts to sort of unravel from there. And even though it just comes off as like one comment on the surface, it was always so remarkable to me how much more there were to these situations than people were comfortable discussing publicly, given the politics of these companies. It was really, really interesting to me, just from like a managerial perspective, that, how many different facets there were in political dynamics there were in managing those situations, right? And in every one of them, of course, several people were fired.
It's crazy.
You can imagine, for me, I'm like 12, right? That's like heavy stuff.
What year did you move from Palo Alto to Wyoming?
Well, I was 16 or maybe 15, whatever year that was. What year was that? 2013? Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked a lot about sports and we've talked a lot about VC, and that seems to be the intersection of where you sit. What are we missing in this kind of dichotomous narrative fallacy that we're probably diving down? What else makes up Matt?
So that I've been really into sports from a very young age. And as a result of that, at some point in my life, I'd say specifically in middle school, I just started taking my training a lot more seriously. And as a part of that, I started taking my nutrition really seriously as well. So I'm sort of mocked for this constantly among my friend group, as being a bit of a health freak. But really, I just look at it as being authentic to, the brand and the customer that we're looking to serve at this time. Funny enough, the sort of properties my dad actually invests in are sports and sports media related properties. So that again has just been, a reinforcement of being around some really interesting individuals in the space. And frankly, being lucky to have that exposure.
So what was the moment in high school? You said you started working on this plan your senior year. What was the moment where you said, you know what, I think I'm going to start my own supplement or create my own supplement?
I'm not sure that there was a moment necessarily, to be honest with you. I'd always been interested in starting a business. I've probably had 100 ideas. I'll probably have another million by the time I die. And this was one of those ideas that felt really personal to me, given how involved I felt in the space and how much personal experience I felt I had, not only with these products, but just with the space and the customer in general. And it was an idea where I think, like that sort of VC mindset that I was raised with, I just sort of kept poking at. And I couldn't sort of find a reason to say no, if you will. And that was something, again, I was taught from an early age, right? That depending on the level, the sort of type of, or I should say stage a company you're investing in, right? Very often for a VC, they're not looking for a reason to do the deal, right? They're looking for a reason not to do the deal. They're going to see 20 decks a day, right? They can't try and justify each one of them, right? They need to look for a reason to not do it. And if they don't find a reason not to do it, then they take it to the next step. And that was sort of how I approached these business ideas. And some of them went further than others. And this was one that went far enough to the point where I really felt like I had a sort of a viable concept. And that was the decision point for me, was not, was this something I wanted to do? It was more like, is this something that I want to really take seriously?
What was the original breadth of the idea? Because I doubt you were just thinking, I want to create another incremental protein supplement. There's probably more to it than that.
Sure. So As I mentioned, I've been really fortunate to have some pretty unique experiences within sports and professional sports in particular. And the observation that really got to me in this space was when I was fortunate enough to go inside an NFL locker room post game. And despite the many other numerous distracting activities going on in that locker room, I essentially couldn't help but notice that the sports nutrition products that I was used to seeing just plastered across the sidelines, across the post-game press conferences, across every inch of professional sports were not in there. They were not in there and they were not being used. And instead, in every player's locker or even in their hands, right? Because we were genuinely in a post-game environment, was products that I had never seen before from brands I'd never heard of that oftentimes look more similar to prescription medicines than they did consumer products. And I don't mean to say that these were like literal prescriptions. I wasn't trying to allude to steroids or something like that. I just meant to say that these were products that were, pharmaceutical grade and from brands that were very, very niche, very, very high quality. And that if you wanted to go buy on, forget a GNC or Vitamin Shop or the like, even a Whole Foods or some sort of high-end retailer, were not going to be there. And so the summary of the observation was essentially that the products that professional athletes were endorsing were not the same as the products that they were genuinely using. And that to me struck me as a really, really interesting opportunity, and that in almost every other category, you have direct transparency to what you're using versus what you actually see the elite athlete using or the elite consumer, right? You can see directly what shoes they're wearing on the field, right? You can see what sort of shorts or what they're wearing, what bike they're wearing, whether it's a Nike or Adidas jersey or whatever, right? It would almost be as if when you saw LeBron endorse, some sort of Kia or Hyundai at halftime, that you as a consumer were like, oh yeah, that's definitely what he drives home in every night, right? Nobody thinks that, right? Nobody thinks that way. But when it comes to this category, that actually is genuinely how we think, right? Because they've done such a good job branding these products. And that, again, just struck me as a really, really interesting opportunity. And I believe one of many symptoms of what I now, describe as a highly antiquated market.
So are you saying that the opportunity that you wanted to capture was creating a consumer brand that was the consumer brand of the high school athlete and the professional athlete?
We wanted to create the product that the professional athletes, regardless of endorsement, literally wanted to buy and use every day, meaning that we wanted to create the product that they were actually authentically going to be using. And we believe that by doing that and creating an authentic relationship there, that we'd be able to leverage that to get the quote aspiring consumer, whether that's the high school athlete, whether that is, somebody more like me that's already buying organic produce, already buying grass-fed meats, right? That hasn't been taught to look for premium products in this category, that they need to be looking for something, again, at a higher level here, right? That guess what? You pay 10 times as much for your gym membership because you want to go to Equinox instead of 24-hour fitness. You pay twice as much for your produce because you want organic produce. You pay twice as much because you care for meat because you care how that animal was raised, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is how every other category in health and fitness functions. What we're asking you to do is we're asking you to pay $2.50 for your shake instead of $1.50 because the product is qualitatively and quantitatively better than what you're buying on a GNC shelf currently.
How do professional athletes make the decision on what supplements they take? Like, walk me through the decision-making process.
I could not have asked you to ask me a better question because it's really, really key to what we actually do in terms of formulating the products. So the short answer is they oftentimes don't have to. And that's why they end up with a product that you and I would have never heard of, right? They don't generally have to make that decision themselves because the vast majority of teams and organizations at this level have multiple people on staff whose full-time job it is to make those decisions. It's actually in the CBA, the collective bargaining agreement for the MLB, for example, that they have a registered dietitian on staff. And just as importantly, that they provide NSF certified products, which are products that have been tested for banned substances, to the athletes in X number of categories. I don't remember how many categories it is exactly, but it's, a dozen or so categories of supplements that the team is actually required to buy for these athletes. And believe it or not, Gatorade is not NSF certified, meaning Gatorade sponsors the league, right? And they don't actually meet the requirements.
Where do they fall short?
It's not NSF certified, meaning it hasn't gone through this testing process, right? It hasn't been tested for label accuracy. It hasn't been tested for banned substances and heavy metals. It hasn't been tested for, other sorts of contaminants, whether I said like that's heavy metals, mycotoxins, other sort of agricultural byproducts. And, they might listen to this and be really upset and say, oh, we test the ingredients when they come in, we test the products ourselves, et cetera. But regardless of that, the standard that the league sets, and actually the standard that every major league in the United States sets, is that they only provide products that are NSF certified for sport, and Gatorade is not.
Are you telling me that when I see a bottle of yellow liquid dumped on a coach, that's not Gatorade?
Could be. It generally is. Yeah, it generally is. But I would say that generally that's almost never the product that the dietitian on staff is recommending that the players use. That doesn't mean that they don't have Gatorade, right? Mm-hmm. I'm certain it's Gatorade being poured on those guys.
So help me understand, you walk in this locker room and you're seeing, I don't recognize these brands, but they're, niche, high level, high performance brands. Are there big players that are in that space that already have a hold on the athlete industry?
There are a ton of big players, and there are a ton of big players that have a, quote, hold on the athlete industry. What I would say is that the players that are in the space, that sort of corner of the market that we're talking about, where you want to say, hey, this is a product that the dietitians and the athletes both want to be using, right? That the strength coaches want to be using, with their own dollars. I probably wouldn't say that there's really a dominant player there because, if I could give you one example, you're both in front of your computers, but I don't want to make you, go to some sort of external site. But like one of the brands I'd say teams use regularly, and one of the ones that I buy a lot of my other supplements from when, we don't produce it yet, is this company Designs for Health. I think they make really, really great products. I think they make high quality products. I think they're honest guys. But when you look at their website, I'm not really going to have to keep explaining it, right? It's like, I actually think in terms of quality, that's probably the highest quality brand on the market right now, right? And that's the type of product we're creating. That is the one that's the most direct competitor for us, again, in terms of the quality of products we're delivering. But I can tell you're on their website right now, right? It's not a consumer brand. Their main channel is selling actually through licensed practitioners. And we actually believe that given the climate right now, again, in health and fitness, that there's a really large group of people that are willing to pay a premium for a premium product that already understand, right, that to some extent you get what you pay for here. You get what you pay for, particularly with things that are putting in your body. And we're not asking for some ridiculous premium, right? It's not nearly the sort of premium you're getting when you're looking at like a cold press, juice product or something like that.
How large is that market? Like how big is this? Could this be?
So when you look at, let's look at this from a couple of different angles. So when you look at the market as a whole, protein powder in the United States is about 7 billion last year. So that's not protein bars. That's not the drinks that you buy at the gas station. That's just the powdered stuff you associate with bodybuilders. That would be the second largest category in what they call performance nutrition behind sports drinks. The category as a whole is probably worth closer to about 20 when you start including, like I said, sports drinks, amino acid products, energy products, and then it gets a little blurry when you get towards the line of VMS or vitamins, mineral supplements as well, right? Because then it's sort of hard to tell where you actually draw the line. When we look at the opportunity for this business, I think it's clearly, at scale, should be able to take more than, 500 million run rate. I think it's clearly a large opportunity given that what we know publicly held companies like Muscle Milk have been able to sell even just through the college market, something short of $100 million a year just selling to collegiate teams. And that's something that we've started doing as well. In fact, those are sort of the easiest customers for us. Although the majority of our revenue, is direct to consumer, and that's the biggest lever. Part of our brand and part of what separates us is that we're actually selling directly to professional teams and customers, right? Meaning that we don't sponsor any pro teams. So I can't say we're the official protein of or the, preferred protein partner of, but I can say to you, just like I can say to a consumer generally that, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Dodgers, Alabama Crimson Tide, the Eagles, the 76ers, the Celtics, about 50 professional teams now get as much Gatorade as they want for free, and they pay for this.
I think we're at a place where I'd like to just kind of lay it out there. What is Momentous today?
Momentous is a performance nutrition startup. Product launched in 2018 with a line of grass-fed whey protein powders, which pretty quickly expanded to include a line of plant-based protein powders as well. So it's a performance nutrition startup, primarily direct consumer.
How'd you meet Rob, and how did he become the co-founder?
So I don't know if the listeners have any actually context for what you're talking about, but if you're presumably talking about Rob Deerdeck. So Rob is actually somebody that I met, not surprisingly, through my dad, but I knew him as an entrepreneur because I knew that among many, many other companies that he's been involved in, I knew he was the founder of a company called Street League Skateboarding, which is essentially what it sounds like. It's the professional league for skateboarding, specifically street skateboarding, which is the most popular kind. So they have all the biggest athletes in the world, all under contract to compete exclusively in this series. Really, really cool company, very cool events. So I knew him as that, and I tried to set up a meeting with him, I guess actually towards the end of 2016, or maybe it was early 2017, basically hoping that if I could walk out of there with a few introductions and maybe an interesting experience, that I thought it would be a win. But we just kind of hit it off. He was really, really interested in consumer brands, really, really interested in early stage startups. And we just hit it off and kept talking. And again, this was like, I did not have a brand. I did not have a product. We did not even have a name for the company. So the reason we like to talk about Rob as co-founder is because not only has he just been a tremendous resource for me, but he really frankly held my hand through so much of this consumer branding process early on. I mean, when we were even just going back and forth with the agency on, logo designs, on name suggestions, on color palettes and things like that, like the documents would come through addressed to Rob and Matt. Specifically, they'd say RD and Matt, but that's fine. Same, you know what I meant.
How did you, as a high school student, early college student, how did you continue to move this ball forward as somebody who didn't necessarily have a background in this industry, just had an interest? You pull on Rob. It seems like you later pulled on some nutrition experts. How did you get all these people to buy into you?
I think that is the sort of whole story, honestly, but that's just what entrepreneurship is about, frankly, is getting people to buy into your ideas. But I actually sort of alluded to this earlier in that, the inflection point or the, aha moment for me that you were trying to look for, right, with respect to this business was not whether or not I thought this was a great business, because that process actually took time. That really took time to sort of build the confidence in myself that, yeah, this made sense. I didn't just think of it one day and be like, yep, that's going to work for sure. It genuinely did take time to convince myself of that. The moment, I think, was when, I guess a bit before talking to Rob, and that I felt like I had laid out a business concept that I had a lot of confidence in selling, that felt viable to me, but was going to need capital. And so I had a conversation with my dad at that time, a few months after graduating from high school again, where he basically said, if you want to just do this for fun and try to have an interesting learning experience, then we can try and do, a sort of small friends and family round. You can have a little bit of money come into this and you can have an interesting, experience. Or if you want to take it seriously and you want to go and try and execute on this vision that you've laid out, then you're going to have to go raise money. And if that's the case, then you're going to be playing with live ammo. So you can't just you can't half-ass it, right? You are going to have to see this through to the end. And so that was the inflection point, if you will. And that was when I had to start and go getting people behind it, right? And so Rob came in as an investor pretty early. I'd say Rob was actually almost certainly the first outside investor in this business, right? He helped me put the whole brand together. And then I used resources again through my father and through the sports connections to try and get in front of people who were really qualified. So the first one I went to was this guy, Dave Scholes. Dave was the assistant strength coach of the 49ers at the time. Maybe he wasn't at the time anymore, but he had been. And that's when I met him originally. Anyways, he was also formally educated in nutrition. Part of his role at the team had been, supplementation protocols and the like, working with the guys on, individual nutrition plans. And so I tried to put together a group of individuals like Dave, and frankly, with Dave's help as well, who really, really knew what they're talking about. And we talk about these people now as the, quote, performance engineers. But specifically what they are is a group of dietitians and strength coaches from each of the 4 major leagues and NCAA who basically tell us what to put in the products. I had a reasonable idea of what kind of products I wanted to start with in this market. So I had to get a, sort of sign off from them as like, hey, that's not stupid, right? Okay, cool. So if you had to give this product to your athletes tomorrow, which for all intents and purposes you do, what would you put in it? Name anything. And as a result of that, we've ended up with a product that we feel is extremely high quality, right? And one that we can talk about with a lot of confidence, and that it wasn't just like, hey, it's going to be whey protein instead of soy protein, or even it's going to be whey isolate instead of whey concentrate, because that was the measure of premium at one point. It's German, cold processed, grass fed, hormone free and antibiotic free whey isolate, because these guys literally had countries that they preferred the dairy farming practices into those in the United States. It's, magnesium glycinate as opposed to magnesium oxide in our recovery products, D-ribose instead of fructose. They're incredibly specific with how they want these products not only sourced, but even processed.
What did you struggle with in the early days of this company?
Everything. No, that's the easy answer. What did I struggle with? That's a great question. I think what I struggled with was probably the same thing I think is the biggest challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs and continues to be the biggest challenge for me today, which is recruiting and managing talent. I think I have a lot of confidence in our product. I have a lot of confidence in my own abilities to sell the brand and the opportunity. But to be transparent with you, I'm not naturally a really outgoing person. I'm not naturally, exceptionally social. And the success of this business hinges upon my ability to manage people, right? I am not an expert in nutrition. What did I just say, right? We went and found a group of people who were the best experts in the space, and actually were the first brand in the space to collaborate with those caliber of individuals directly. I'm not the expert there. Guess what? I'm not the expert on consumer branding either. I had to figure out how to bring somebody like Rob into the brand who could walk me through that process, right? And who could provide direct input and leadership for me there. I am not an expert certainly not on social media. I'm not an expert on athlete relationships. I'm not an expert on, that's the same as influencer marketing, right? But I'm not an expert on, customer acquisition online or social media marketing. I certainly have no hint of expertise when it comes to finance or accounting. So in all of those areas, the success depends upon not my ability to actually understand those concepts, right? But my ability to work with and manage people who can do that.
How come you decided to do that on a distributed basis? You have employees not just in Jackson and not just in Palo Alto, but you also have one in Austin. Why the distributed nature of a team? There's
actually 2 of them in Dallas.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. If they're listening, they would want me to correct that. They're very funny guys. The reason is because I've spent a lot of time around Silicon Valley and I'm trying to make money. So I don't want to try and my priority is trying to find the right people, right? My priority is trying to find the right people. And so when we need to pay a premium for talent, that's fine. And that's great. But the cost of talent and the competition for it in the Bay Area is just so ridiculous that frankly, I think we we've been better off. We've been better off as a result of it. I'm not trying to hire a programmer, right? What were we trying to hire? We tried to hire, let's take the guys in Texas, for example. Those are our two salespeople right now. I could not care less whether or not they've worked at Facebook or Google, right? That is completely irrelevant to what we're doing. What did we care about? We cared that they had sales experience. We cared that they were truly authentic and actually experts in the space of the product that they were selling, right? Meaning that both of them actually have formal education and backgrounds in performance training. Meaning that in essence, they're actually not only salespeople, they're in some respects, they're actually selling to their peers. So they were bringing their own networks to the table here, and that's part of what's made us successful thus far with collegiate and professional organizations, right? So in those instances, like, it was actually for me clearly better not to place a priority on having talent in a Silicon Valley type location.
Did you guys, it sounds like you guys created the whole brand before you had the product fully formulated. Is that correct?
I wish that was correct. We tried to do as much as we could, and from there you just learn as you go. Does that make sense? Meaning that, like, we tried to lay out as much of this brand as we could, right? We tried to put together as much of our roadmap as we tried to put flags in the ground wherever we could, right? And the understanding and the expectation was not that was going to be the same 5 years from now, right? The expectation was that to execute on our goals, we had to have something, right? We had to have some clear plan and vision. And not surprisingly, as all startups, do, we've learned and grown since then. We've learned by being in the market.
When Rob was helping you with the first steps of the consumer brand, you said he was kind of holding your hand and pulling you through with the agencies. They're sending these ideas.
That's a gentle word for it, yes.
What did you learn from him as it relates to the importance of brand as it comes to consumer?
That's a bit of a broad question, to be honest. I think probably the most important thing I've learned from Rob so far is to be hyper-focused on your consumer, not just in terms of demographics and the like, but literally trying to hyper-focus in on who exactly is the customer, who exactly are you building the product and the brand for? Who and how many people does that matter to? Who does that relate to, right? How many of those people are there? Guess what? You've defined this person. Don't just tell me what kind of products they're buying in this space. What kind of products are they buying in every other consumer space? What kind of content are they consuming? How old are they? Where do they live? What do they like? What are their motivations? What are they most likely to have as an occupation? Like, really trying to just go insanely over the top when it comes to really dialing in on who exactly the consumer is you're looking to serve.
You talk a lot about the athletes. You want this to be something that the athletes can use, but this is a consumer brand. So how do you approach sales, and how instrumental is the athlete side of things to making this take off in consumer?
It's everything, because it's so core to our brand, right? It's so core to who our customer is and who we are serving, right? That they want to be using the product that they think the smartest people in the space are using. So when we talk about our, quote, core customer, that's the person that we describe as the performance professional, right? That's literally the person that we design the products with, and it's the person that we design the products for. And that is almost always somebody, and the reason we describe it as a, quote, professional, right, is that's generally somebody who is formally educated in the space, who is at the top of their game. There's not a lot of these people, so that's not who drives the majority of our revenue, right? But it's who we design the products for. And that's why it's so important to us, right? In order to be authentic to that relationship, that we don't just use professional, again, dietitians and strength coaches to formulate the products, right? That they actually then put their dollars and their names behind it, meaning that they didn't just help us formulate it, but they're actually using their team's budget or their organization's budget now to buy this product instead of any other product. And in fact, they're generally paying a premium to do so.
How does your customer base break down in terms of percentage of revenue? I'm seeing organizations, this ideal, performance professional, and direct to consumer. Is there another bucket I'm missing? And if so, how does that play into like your revenue as a percentage for each?
So if you look at it from a very high level, we're about 2 to 1 in terms of all direct to consumer or consumer sales versus organizations, B2B sales, which are primarily professional teams, collegiate teams, some very high end training facilities like where, athletes are training in the off season or the like. But they're really, really connected, and that we talk about those organizations that we're working with and selling to endlessly, right? We talk about that endlessly because we believe that that's what our wider audience, right? The more side of our audience actually relates to and aspires to, right? They don't think they're going to be in the NFL, or they don't think they're going to be climbing Mount Everest and skiing down, right? But they want to use whatever the products those people are using. It's not really an outside the box concept in that respect, but as a result, it's really, really important that we are able to create relationships in that space. And we do it partly, I guess part of the reason we've been able to justify such a large percentage of our revenue there is that it's not a loss leader for us by any measure. The product moves at a different, I honestly don't know what it is off the top of my head. It moves at a different price point when it's bought in bulk like that, right? But we have almost the same margin to a professional team that we do to a consumer.
Are you guys still iterating on the product, or is it what it is?
We're constantly iterating on it. I'd say the biggest changes we're going to make in terms of the product itself would likely be, new flavor introductions, but as one example, when we introduced one of the recovery products originally, we included 100 or 150 milligrams of magnesium glycinate in the product. Magnesium is incredibly important for a million different enzymatic processes in the body, but helps downregulate, your central nervous system after an intense workout, basically helps you get out of fight or flight mode, lower cortisol, et cetera. But we had started with this magnesium glycinate actually about 6 months in, and on our second or third production order, we actually switched it to a magnesium citrate. This is maybe more information than you want, but the thing is that the first form is magnesium chelated, meaning bonded to the glycine amino acid. And it turns out that the NCAA does not allow the administration of, quote, free form amino acids. So that would be considered to some folks inadmissible, meaning that we substituted it with what we felt was an extremely high quality alternative, magnesium citrate, which is magnesium bonded to citric acid.
Is this something that is patentable?
We don't really want it to be, frankly. We have, obviously agreements in place with our suppliers where we own the formulas, right? But we actually try to talk about our products with as much transparency as possible, because I believe that's really, really important to what makes the product high quality in the first place, right? That we're not just telling you exactly how many milligrams of each ingredient are going in there, but we're literally telling you down to the specific location itself where each of those ingredients comes from on a map, because it's incredibly important to know where these things are coming from, because when we've chosen a source, we've chosen it for a reason.
If you could look at 2 metrics in your business to say, okay, how is my business doing? Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? And one of those wasn't like revenue or cash flow. Take those 2 out. What 2 metrics would you look for?
Not revenue and cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
Then the obvious ones I'd say would be CAC and LTV. But if I could be a little more specific, maybe I would say customer acquisition. If I could actually only pick 2, I'd probably say CAC on the direct consumer side. And then on the sales side, I'd want to look at like new client growth. And the reason I took out the LTV is not because it's not important. It's because we just see sort of less monthly fluctuation in that currently than we do on things like the acquisition cost or the consumer, the client growth month over month. And also the concern for us right now, given how early stage this business is so much more about growing, right? We're going to have tons of opportunities to increase the value that we get out of each consumer over time, particularly through new product introductions. So if I could only pick 2, I'd probably be looking at, on the team side, I'd be looking at new client growth, and on the consumer side, I'd be looking at CAC.
Have you felt, or have you seen CAC rising significantly in the last 12 months?
We've actually only been at it in terms of, direct to consumer marketing for, I'd still say less than a year. So I wouldn't call it quite 12 months, but we've actually seen it go down. The first couple months we were doing it, it was, I'd say we were just learning. We were learning about our consumer. We were learning about the audiences that were responding to us well. We were learning about the content that they were responding to. We were learning about frequency. We were learning about the cost of inputs on the content side as well. Like I said, it's just been a tremendous learning process for me. So we've actually seen the numbers improve dramatically, especially over the last 6 months in particular. The numbers have gone from sort of bouncing up and down and generally being higher than we wanted to dropping into a place that we're really excited about and have been sort of consistent and consistently trending downward in the last, I'd say specifically like 5 months. They've been really good.
If I go to a GNC, I see just a ton of these things, right? Not your type specifically, but
ton was actually a really good word for it. Somebody's going to get mad at me for that.
So what is the threat of a highly capitalized existing brand that is a consumer brand that isn't in the real performance space to see what you guys are doing and say, okay, they're giving us exactly the regions and the formulations. Let's just do that and pour more cash on it. What level of risk is there for that?
I'd say there's a risk that you see an incumbent in the space try to come out with a new product line, meaning as opposed to like a premium version of Optimum Nutrition, right? That they launch some new product line that is ultra premium, right? And tries to talk about really high quality sources, tries to talk about third party certification, tries to talk about their ingredient quality and the like. I think that's always a risk. I think that's a risk in any consumer product. I think part of what makes this business really defensible is the relationships we've developed within the space. And that is so key to our brand that you almost can't buy a lot of those things. Meaning that, without trying to be, sort of too disclosive, we're the first brand in our space to collaborate directly with dietitians and strength coaches from each of the 4 major leagues. These are actual employees of professional teams that are now shareholders in our business, right? The reason we're able to do that is because through the network here, when the deals had to be approved by the team's GM, or for the NFL guys had to be approved by the league office, we knew those guys on a first name basis. So my dad's actually a partial owner in a couple professional sports teams. So that frankly is not something that any sort of Optimum Nutrition brand in terms of access can just pay for. You can't actually throw dollars at those sorts of relationships, nor can you throw dollars at some of the relationships that we've developed with athletes as well, where, our biggest advocates in terms of athlete representation or even just the broader term of influencer are people that started as customers and actually ended up being investors in the brand.
I have one last question. I'm curious because you have such a strong role model and I guess mentor as a father. If there's any piece of advice that sticks out to you that your dad gave you that you have either strongly disagreed with or acted against in context of this business?
He told me to stay in school and I dropped out.
What was the fallout of that?
I wouldn't say he was happy about it. I wouldn't say that either of my parents, if it was their choice entirely, would have supported that. But I think that's out of a place of love and out of a place of concern for me, where they don't want to see me end up with regrets. They don't want to see me end up unhappy. They don't want to see me miss out on, quote, childhood experiences. I also know, just anecdotally, that there have been people in the network that have hesitated to be, quote, too supportive, right, of what I'm doing because they didn't want to see me drop out, right? They didn't want to encourage that to actually happen. But I think it's gotten a lot better as the business has continued to continue on a really promising trajectory. And frankly, I just sort of accepted that as something I was going to have to live with. I wasn't making that decision. I wasn't making a decision to start a business to make them happy. I wasn't making a decision even to go to school in the first place to make them happy. That's not why I wanted to go to school, right? So when I decided not to be in school anymore, it didn't to me feel like I was changing that mindset, right? I was doing what I wanted to do to support what I wanted to do with my life. And it's unfortunate that not everybody would see the same side of that. But honestly, I think to say that my parents have been anything less than supportive of this would be wrong. I'd say, so let me clarify that. Supportive of me. I wouldn't say directly supportive of like not being in school, but clearly overwhelmingly supportive of me.
Awesome. This has been really great, Matt. Thanks so much for taking the time. If people want to learn more about you or Momentous after the show, where should they go?
Livemomentous.com is our website. @livemomentous is our Instagram. On Instagram, I am generally reasonably responsive, reasonably posting photos of skiing or dogs, but let me look up what my handle is. It's _Matt.Wan. I need to start learning that. _Matt, 2 T's, .Wan, W-A-N. Again, reasonably responsive there. Lots of cute dog photos.
All right, Jay. So we just spoke with Matt Wan of Momentous. And look, that was a fun interview, but I'm not a health and wellness guy. You're not a supplement and vitamin guy. This maybe isn't our wheelhouse. So let's bring in our friend Tenika Seitz, who is really into the health and wellness scene. Tenika works for Beam Dental in Columbus and also is very active on Instagram talking about health and wellness. It's a big part of her life, and we're happy to have her on to give us a little bit of insight into how she thinks about purchasing decisions.
Tenika, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Tenika, we brought you on because Jay and I, as you can tell by our physique, are not big fitness guys. We needed a little bit of insight. Can you kind of give us your background in fitness and how you got into it?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up pretty active. So I was involved in sports, as a kid through high school, everything like that. I wasn't very active in college, but then after college, working really hard, I needed a release. And so I started doing yoga. And that was really the beginning, I would say, of my fitness journey. I started doing yoga regularly, really for the mindfulness aspect. And then from there, just continued to become interested in fitness and everything that it could do for, my well-being overall. Yeah. And that's led me to just continue to be curious and research and discover just ways to overall increase my wellness.
How much would you say you care about fitness versus nutrition?
I think that I personally care about both equally, but to me, you can't have one without the other. You can work out every single day and work really hard, but if you're not eating right, then you're still going to feel like crap, and vice versa. If you're eating well, but you're not getting any physical exercise, or you're not doing that mindfulness at least once or twice a week, then you're not really going to feel the best that you possibly could.
I feel like so much out there. Like, how do you know what to trust? How are you finding your research? I feel like there's so many fads that go in and out. There's so many things that are like pseudoscience. Like, who are you following? What do you look to find out like what's real in fitness and what's real in nutrition?
Yeah, for sure. That's, I think, kind of a big problem for fitness and nutrition in general today. A lot of people look toward social media or, just whatever the popular fad is. And you see people get really excited and spend a lot of money or energy doing something that really might just be popular for the moment. And it actually doesn't have as much nutritional value that it's being sold on. So for me, I tend to do a lot of research and I tend to experiment. That's kind of my form of research. So I'll look into something, and if I want to give it a try, I'll try it out, and I try to be super mindful about it. Give it a few weeks, pay attention to my body, listen to how I'm reacting to certain things that I'm experimenting with, and then kind of go from there.
How are you finding things initially? Before you get to the experiment stage, how does something come across your radar?
Sure. I think for me, it kind of depends on what I'm interested in, I guess, fixing or resolving. Everything for me is kind of based on what do I need to improve on my personal health. So, for example, I've struggled with headaches. So it's just doing research on, okay, well, what could potentially be the cause of these headaches? What could potentially be the reason that I'm feeling this way in the first place? And then looking into, okay, if it's a lack of calcium or magnesium or something like that, trying to dig in a little bit there and figure out, okay, well, I'm not just going to start taking calcium supplements or magnesium supplements. I want to even better understand why I might be deficient in those vitamins in the first place.
Yeah. What types of supplements do you use personally right now?
So I've definitely had a pretty long supplement journey. I currently am taking a handful of things, but I would say that even for me, somebody who's been taking supplements for probably 4 or 5 years consistently now, I still am not in a place where I would say, yep, this is great. This is what I'm going to take for the rest of my life, because things are constantly changing with my lifestyle. So one thing that I've taken consistently for the past 4 years, and it really hasn't wavered at all, is just a once daily vitamin. And I take a once daily women's vitamin that includes, women's health. It's a probiotic. So it includes things to support the women's health system, our immune system, our digestive system, things that vary just a little bit from a man. And then I also personally take a B complex every single day. And those two things have been pretty consistent for the past several years. Whereas, there are also a couple things that I'm taking now that currently just trying out or taking in the moment based on my lifestyle today.
Who do you look to as like a role model in fitness or nutrition?
I don't know if I have like one specific role model or one specific person that I look to, but there are a handful of, I guess, fitness influencers that I kind of migrate toward because I know that these individuals value the same things that I do. For example, they are only looking at all natural things or supplements that are made with quality ingredients or, whole foods, things like that.
Tenika, do those fitness influencers tend to be like professional athletes, or do they tend to be just people who really, really focus on fitness that have built their own name and brand around their lifestyle and thoughts?
For me, I think it's actually tends to be the latter, for no specific reason other than that's just organically how it's happened for me. I'm sure that there are a lot of athletes out there that my values align with, but I've just happened to follow along with a lot of just influencers.
Anecdotally, if one of your kind of group of influencers that you cared about came out and said they were using a product, how much more likely are you to experiment with that product if they care about it and are using it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually really glad you asked that question because I think the biggest thing when it comes to like influencer marketing or following along with people that, in general, I might see have the same values as me or tend to migrate toward the same type of products that I'm interested in and things like that. At the end of the day, every single person's body is different. So even if I see an influencer trying a supplement, that might prompt me to then go look into it and do some research on what that supplement is or, why I might be interested in it. But if I start to find out that it's something that I don't necessarily need, or even then if I start taking it and realize that it's not something that is really adding to my routine, then I can determine that I don't need to take that supplement just because somebody that I follow is.
Awesome. And Tenika, if people want to find out more about you or what you're up to, where should they go?
Oh, sure. I am on social media at Tenika Time and tenikatime@gmail.com if anyone wants to reach out.
All right, Jay. So that finishes up our interview with Matt, and we just talked with Tenika. Let's get into our supplemental section of the podcast. Let's talk the deal memo. What are you thinking?
I am so mad that I could not come up with a retort to that bad. I guess it's a good segue. But I should have had something and I didn't have it. Yes, let's get into the supplemental section of our episode, the deal memo. Let's round this out. Maybe a little bit of the recovery section here.
Ooh, there you go. You gave yourself a little bit of time, you worked it out, and you got to the pun. That's the important thing here on Upside.
I worked out and I recovered.
You worked out and you recovered. Man, we are on fire today, exercising all of our hacks, all of our tricks.
Wow. Okay, so let's talk about Matt as a founder, shall we?
Let's do it.
So something that stood out to me, tell me if I'm wrong, I think Matt's the youngest guest we've had on the show.
As far as I know, we don't usually ask age. The only reason we got to age is because I was very curious about if he had any experiences listening to his dad on calls in the 96 to 99, 2000 era, which would have been fascinating. But it turns out he was born in that era. And that was not my expectation.
Yeah, graduated high school sometime around, I forget the year now, but I know he dropped out of college as a freshman at Harvard in 2016, I want to say, to pursue this full time. So I say that to preface this next comment, which is I was very, very impressed with Matt's intelligence and intentionality for someone his age, younger than us. It's clear to me, and not even that, I was also incredibly impressed with his ability to lead and get buy-in from all kinds of people who were both much older and much more experienced than him. And not only was he aware that that is essentially his full-time job to do that, but it's very clearly a huge focus for him at this stage of running his business.
Yeah, and I thought that it showed a lot about him that his dad, who he talked about a lot throughout the interview, wanted him to stay in school to the point of people weren't really helping him as much as they could because they knew his dad's wishes. And he still kind of went against that because he knew this is the way he wanted to go. I think that shows that while he's understanding of his scenario and he's leveraging the life that he was brought into, he's not just a puppet or a younger version of his dad kind of following the same footsteps and doing whatever he says.
It was incredibly apparent. I mean, even putting aside the natural benefits of the relationships you get from being born into that world.
Yeah, he name dropped Fred Wilson by just saying Fred. That's pretty dope.
Oh, I did not catch that. Besides the relationships that he obviously has access to, putting those aside, it's very apparent that being born in Menlo Park on Sand Hill Road and being in that ecosystem has a very profound effect on somebody growing up into an entrepreneurial lifestyle. Like, he's years ahead of how to think about things and how to approach things because he was in the car listening to his dad take calls about companies and about problems within companies. You know, that was a fascinating little aside we took there to hear some of the things that stuck out to him were the big issues within companies that his dad had invested in and had to deal with over the phone.
We've spent a little over a year now, doing this once a week or more on calls and talking with founders. And we don't have the same level of experience he has just talking or hearing from founders.
So, Eric, coming at this still from the founder perspective, what about Matt do you think makes him the right person to run a supplements company?
This isn't exactly what he said, but he opened up the interview saying, I'm running this company, which means I have to be this person, almost. It wasn't the exact phrasing, but I think that level of determination showed through the entire interview where it's, here's my goal, here's what I'm going to do, here's what I'm going to build, and I will reach that goal no matter what obstacles come up. So I'm going to be that person.
I was surprised and impressed with the humility and self-awareness he showed to say, I got to pull in these people who are the right people. I got to go talk to this guy who is the 49ers strength and conditioning coach and also his nutritional coach to get this together. I've got to work with Rob and let Rob hold my hand through the process of branding this thing. I think that's a level of self-awareness and humility that not a lot of people at his age have, let alone a lot of entrepreneurs. So I think that bodes really well for him as a founder.
One question we asked on a previous podcast about a founder who we thought would be very successful was, is this going to be their masterpiece? Is this company going to be the company that kind of defines them? And in our interview, Matt said, this is just one of my first 100 ideas. I'm going to have 1 million more. What was your take on, is this the company or is this a company in Matt's life?
I think it's definitely a company. I think this has the potential, little spoiler into when we talk about the opportunity. I think this has the potential to be a very successful business, but I don't know if this is the type of business that somebody like Matt is going to want to run for 30 years, where you go through probably a different couple product launches and iterate on the packaging and the messaging and the marketing. But for all intents and purposes, the idea of this product is going to be mostly finished and it's going to be finesse as this company grows up. And I see him as somebody who's going to figure out, okay, since I've pulled together all the parts and pieces to make this business run, and I was kind of the glue of that, I can also hire myself out of this business and go explore something else.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
I don't either. This market, moving into the opportunity, Matt mentioned to us that the protein powder market is about $7 billion. He said, to his estimations, this business has about a $500 million run rate potential. So right there, he's opting himself out of what Nick Solaro at Drive Capital would consider a big enough market for a Drive Capital type investment. What is your take here on the opportunity at hand?
Yeah, he pretty much gave us a market size. We didn't really have to back into anything. The only way that I think you expand beyond that, or I don't know if that's included in this calculation, I probably should have asked, is to add a lifestyle component to this business. Make it more than just a product business, but make it a company. My initial take on a $500 million run rate as like a 7% market shareholder, that's a pretty good sized business. I think you're going to get a good valuation, a good acquisition out of it if you want to. You could also probably just mint cash flow. But the appetite for luxury goods at commodity producers is always high. That's why Anheuser-Busch bought 312 and every other craft brewery they could. It's why you'll see, if this takes off to the level he's thinking, someone like Abbott take a stab at buying this to have a luxury good that has a higher margin. I mean, I see it as a great company that could do very well. I don't know that it's going to be your next multi-billion-dollar unicorn, though.
Off air, you and I talked about the packaging because we both thought that the packaging was really well done. And you told a story about RX Bar and their packaging. Can you tell us, one, who bought RX Bar, and two, can you just share that story with the listeners?
RX Bar is a fruit and nut energy bar that's branded as extremely healthy. When they first launched, I think they had some weird kind of packaging, and they may have gotten to select Whole Foods or all the Whole Foods. I'm not really sure. Then they did a rebrand, and they came up with a package that I'm sure you're familiar with that is extremely simple, that says exactly what's in each bar. They raised very little in terms of venture capital, and they sold for $600 million to Kellogg's. So the founder owned a huge percentage of that business. And really, they didn't change the product at all, but packaging matters. And we heard this when we talked to Karen Howland at Circle Up, and when I listened to her colleague, Ryan Caldbeck, on the Invest Like the Best podcast, that packaging is actually one of the things that their algorithm looks at. Does the packaging match a certain style that's going to drive customer engagement? And I think that the packaging here on Momentous is incredible.
Yeah, so there's an example of an acquisition. Who ended up buying RX Bar?
Kellogg's bought RX Bar, and I believe I saw a report that although Kellogg's bought them for $600 million in their first year of operations under Kellogg's, I think RX Bar made up about $100 million of Kellogg's sales. So that gives you some sort of context to the valuation, which is essentially a 6x revenue multiple. So if you're looking at $500 million run rate, that's a $3 billion business.
That run rate is almost certainly predicated a little bit on the price point of Momentous' product. From what we've seen, it's priced at about $55 to $70 per package. And in a previous article, Matt had mentioned that he had gotten some pushback from that price point. You buy protein powders. You've seen price tags. What do you think about that price point?
Yeah, it's high. It's definitely high. I don't know that high price is something that scares me as a potential investor, though. Maybe as a consumer, there's a little bit of sticker shock up front. But there are still people who say, hey, I won't pay $3 for a cup of Starbucks coffee. And look how great Starbucks is doing. There are people who say, yeah, coffee, that should be 50 cents. That should be 25 cents. Or at McDonald's, 99 cents. Why would I pay $3 for it? Luxury goods are always going to have pushback on price.
Yeah, I'm not really afraid of it either. And I was a little surprised to see, one, that he mentioned it, and two, that it had gotten enough pushback for him to mention it, because I think the consumer behavior here for this type of avatar that I believe his customer is, I think that consumer behavior exists. If you look at stores like Lululemon, for example, I can't believe the prices for their products. I have to think that the customer avatar for Lululemon is going to be similar to that of Momentous. It may be a little bit different, given that this product is a lot more consumable than a Lululemon good.
I don't know. There's premium products everywhere, consumable and non-consumable. Just go to any grocer, like he mentioned in the interview, and you can pay effectively 100% more for something that's organic than something that's not. I remember seeing the green bell peppers last time I went grocery shopping at Whole Foods, and they were like 99 cents for a pepper. And then if you got the organic ones, it was like $4.99 each. I was like, you're going to pay 5 times as much for something that's organic? And a lot of that's Amazon subsidizing green bell peppers. But still, I don't think the idea of it being consumable versus not consumable is a problem. The thing that I have the biggest shadow about with Momentous, and before I say it, Jay, I want to hear if you can guess what you think I'm going to say.
I'm going to guess competitors coming into the space with copycat products.
I have zero care about that.
Wow.
Yeah, that is not even a risk that's really on my radar. Premium price products alongside of it, not a big deal. If you have copycats, it's because you're doing really well, and the copycats are later to you, which means that you already have the name brand. You already are making the waves, so everyone else is just trying to catch on. You're the Athleta to the Lululemon. No one walks around wearing Athleta proudly, though they do wear it. That being said, my biggest shadow is about the underlying thesis that people want the same supplements that professional athletes use. I don't know that the fact that someone actually uses a supplement means that I'm more likely or someone is more likely to use it. I think that what we heard from Tenika makes more sense to me, where if someone you follow uses something, you'll try it. But you want these people to be people who have a lot of content, who you have a relationship with. And just because Russell Westbrook uses Momentous products, that doesn't mean much to me. Now, if it's Russell Westbrook and this is the protein powder of these people, that's a different branding story. But I don't know. There's something about this link that just doesn't click with me, and I don't really know what it is.
I follow you there, and I'm going to try and elucidate what you're saying a little bit more. I think the thing that doesn't quite click for you is that the people generally in mass who buy products because athletes use them or they think athletes use them are much more of the hardcore fan of sports and less of the aspiring performance professional. And the aspiring performance professional is much more thoughtful and intentional about what goes into their body. And so it's less about the name recognition. But I think it comes down to, if this is a superior product and it is something that is the best thing that can go into your body, that link might exist. But I think what you're saying is it wouldn't necessarily need to be that the athletes are using it, or that wouldn't necessarily be the driver that makes it click for that professional.
It's almost like there's a Venn diagram of athlete or someone who's really into fitness on one side and sports fan on the other. And you need those to overlap perfectly and find that middle ground. And those are the people who are going to want to try this, use this, and have this. My biggest shadow and question is, how big is that overlap?
So Eric, what are you looking for in the next 6 to 18 months for Momentous?
I know I just said that my biggest shadow is around the athlete and how much that actually matters. That being said, I do believe that having partnerships with as many of these teams as you can is going to increase the chances and increase the number of people that are using your product on the professional side, to increase the size of that middle of that Venn diagram as big as possible with all the different sports. So what I want to see is more headway on partnerships with teams, on partnerships with leagues, on athletes organically tweeting or talking about Momentous, things that are on the athlete side, because I think the DTC side will follow if the thesis holds up. What about you?
I'm looking at a trend that Matt mentioned, which was declining customer acquisition cost. That on its own sounds like a really great sign, but I think that's probably sort of a predictive arc for direct-to-consumer marketing. Early on, your customer acquisition cost is high because you don't know what you're doing and you're figuring it out. Then it starts to decrease, and you're like, wow, this is really great. But then you're going to hit this time where you're starting to saturate that audience that you're targeting really well, or you're competing with other products that are similar and you're paying more and more to get to those incremental customers. That seems to be the D2C evolution. So I want to see how that customer acquisition cost is holding 6 to 18 months from now, how that maps to lifetime value. And I want to continue to learn more about what they're learning about their consumer. You know, they launched this product in late 2018. They have an assumption of who their avatar is. To our point here just a couple of minutes ago, we want to see if that assumption truly holds water. And if so, how big is that market?
Love it. If you check out the product at livemomentous.com, we'd love to hear what you think about it. We'd love to hear what you think about this company and this opportunity and this founder. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM or send us something a little longer at hello@upside.fm.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter at UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way and get it.